Hey, this is Cold Turkey, and today we're going to be talking about Doctor Who. More specifically, we're going to be talking about the Third Doctor. This is part 4 of my 9-part series, Old School Doctor Who. So the Third Doctor was around between January 1970 and June 1974, had 5 seasons and 4.5 years. One of the great things about the Third Doctor is the show became color. So in 1970, Doctor Who transitioned from black and white into color, although as a side note, there are a few episodes of the Third Doctor that I guess the BBC lost the original color printing, so they had to do black and white. I don't know. More than 90% of the episodes of the Third Doctor are in color, but every now and again you'll get a black and white because they did something stupid. The Third Doctor, in a lot of ways, is the James Bond of Doctor Who. He's got fast cars, gimmicky gadgets, evil villains that he fights. He's got sexy ladies all around. He likes to get into physical fights a lot. He's a black belt in Venusian karate. Really a lot of awesome stuff with the Third Doctor. 24 stories, just over 130 episodes. So there's been a ton of stuff with the Third Doctor. And I'm just going to come out and say it. I'm just going to be honest. The Third Doctor is my favorite Doctor of all time. Now, as soon as I say that, a lot of people are shocked. Because for most people, when you ask them who their favorite Doctor is, they're going to say the Fourth Doctor, Tom Baker, the guy with the scarf, or they're going to say probably the 10th Doctor, aka David Tennant, one of the more recent Doctor Who's. Very, very few people would be willing to say that the Third Doctor is their favorite Doctor. However, most people like the Third Doctor, but to be honest, he is my personal favorite. I really like the Third Doctor. Now, as always, when we talk about Doctor Who, we need to talk about the actor who portrayed the Doctor, because I really think that's important to kind of get behind the Doctor and his personality. So the person who played the Third Doctor was a gentleman named Jon Pertwee. Like his two predecessors, he also fought in World War II. He was in the Royal Navy. Once he was done with all that business, he went to drama school, kind of to get into acting. One of the funnier stories I was reading is he was actually expelled from the school after he refused to play the wind during one of the lessons because he thought it was a waste of his time. And then he was also accused of graffitiing the tutor's toilet walls, so they kicked him out. And there's also funny stories about how when he was in the Navy, he was drunk all night and he just woke up in the morning in a blur and he had a tattoo and he didn't really remember how he got it. So Jon Pertwee was definitely kind of a party animal and a really awesome guy if you look into what he did in his real life. Then he did Doctor Who. He enjoyed that for several years. Really left a huge mark on the show, and he died in 1996, so rest in peace, Jon Pertwee. And there you go. That is Jon Pertwee in a sort of a quick run-by, if you will. As always, we want to talk more about the Doctor than the actor who played the Doctor. So let's get back into this whole Third Doctor. Remember earlier I talked about how he's kind of the James Bond of Doctor Who. That's really why I think overall I like the Third Doctor more than any other Doctor. Just his personality. He's really outgoing, really friendly, but at the same time, he just has a different persona than really any other Doctor. Like I'd mentioned, he has fast cars, Betsy. He has a car that's sort of this augmented Earth car that he puts a bunch of technology in. Now you say, why would he need a car? Well, one of the interesting things about the Third Doctor is he is sort of stranded on planet Earth for almost the entirety of the 5 seasons he played. Later on, he got some freedom. Basically, the Time Lords sentenced him to be prisoned on one planet in one time because he had violated their rules. He was always out doing things, and the Time Lords didn't appreciate that. So he's kind of stuck on Earth for the most part. Later on, more towards like the 4th or 5th season, you see he kind of gets some freedom here and there. Evil villains, and this is something we really need to talk about, is the Master. It was the Third Doctor that introduced the Master as the Doctor's arch nemesis, so to speak. The Master was originally played by a gentleman named Roger Delgado. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but he is definitely the original Master. He's evil, but at the same time he kind of respects the Doctor, but his worst nightmare is the Doctor sort of laughing at him, and so he's got this evil, I'm going to conquer the universe, I am the Master. He hypnotizes people, he's not afraid to kill or murder. I mean, he's a really, really well-designed villain, and I really think it's awesome. Unfortunately, Roger Delgado died before the end of the Third Doctor's 5 seasons. I can't remember exactly when he died, but they actually had more stories planned for the Master, but unfortunately due to Roger's death, they had to cut out those stories. So you see the Master all the time in seasons 8, 9, and even 10, and then suddenly he just kind of stops showing up. Well, that's because the actor who played him had died. And you don't see a lot of the Master until towards the end of the Fourth Doctor. You see him kind of briefly here and there every now and again. So the Master is introduced, and he's a great arch-villain. He's a great sort of counter to the Doctor. They get in a lot of fights. They'll have sword fights, or they'll sit there and kind of verbally spar with each other. It's really awesome to see, and it really works out. And then also I talked about the sexy ladies. The Doctor has 3 assistants through the course of his 5 seasons. The third Doctor has 3 assistants. The first assistant he gets for season 7 is Liz Shaw, who wears short skirts. I wear short skirts. Liz Shaw is kind of a scientist who just happens to be smoking hot and wears short skirts for no particular reason, which I'm all for. I'm definitely for that. Seasons 8, 9, and 10 had Jo Grant, who was kind of this ditz. Her father had gotten her into the position, so she didn't really necessarily earn it. She does a lot of just stupid things, but you can tell she really cares. Oh, but it's Jo Grant. Oh, let me cross my legs, pointing at the camera. So, they kind of give her the short skirts and everything to wear, and that's fine. And then in season 11, the last season of the Third Doctor, we're introduced to Sarah Jane Smith for the first time. And she's more of a raging feminist kind of a lady, doesn't dress quite as scantily. I still think she's pretty hot, though. The interesting thing is that Sarah Jane Smith would become, later on, one of the most recognized companion of the Doctor. Unfortunately, the actress who played Sarah Jane Smith recently passed away due to cancer, which is unfortunate because they had more planned for her. But Sarah Jane Smith really became a popular companion, and she was introduced in the last season of the Third Doctor. One of the funniest things that I think is a good scene is when Sarah Jane Smith was first introduced to the Doctor said, well, why don't you make yourself useful and go make me some coffee? And, Sarah Jane Smith is just this huge, feminist movement kind of back in the 70s, and she doesn't like it. She does not appreciate the Doctor telling her to go make him some coffee. Another interesting thing about the Third Doctor is UNIT. At the time, I believe it was United Nations Intelligence Task Force, although I think it's changed since then. UNIT is sort of this military organization that fights the unknown, that battles the aliens, that are almost on a weekly basis trying to take over planet Earth, rather unfortunately for us. But thankfully we have somebody like UNIT to protect us. The quote-unquote man in high power, he's not the leader of UNIT, he's just an officer, is Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart. And we had seen him previously interact with the Doctor, and the Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart really, I think, becomes a main staple of Doctor Who. Earlier I had said Sarah Jane Smith was the most recognized companion of the Doctor, but, arguably you could say Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart, but he's not really portrayed as a companion because he doesn't sort of hang out with the Doctor, and he doesn't really go into the TARDIS that much. He's sort of his own man, almost like a secondary hero, a secondary role within the show. And most of the time, I'd say in about 2/3 of the scripts that are written, the Brigadier is portrayed as a genuinely intelligent, capable, smart military leader. He rose to his rank not because he's a retard, but because he worked hard and he knows what he's doing. He actually has the skills to do his job. Unfortunately, in the other 1/3, it seems about, of the scripts that were written for the Third Doctor, the Brigadier is portrayed as a bumbling, buffooning fool who refuses to believe anything even when the evidence is right in front of him, despite the fact he has fought multiple invasions of aliens in the past. I would say that's one of the few sour notes I have with the Third Doctor, is every now and again the scripts portray the Brigadier as a retard, and it pisses me off. It really upsets me when I see that, because so often you see the Brigadier portrayed as a genuinely intelligent military guy, even though he has his shortcomings and his faults, but still. So you see the Brigadier a lot, and he's there. And then the other great thing about the Third Doctor is the physical sort of fighting. The Third Doctor is quote-unquote black belt of Venusian karate, I think he calls it. So he's always getting into fights. He's always flipping people around, karate chopping. More so than any other Doctor, I think, in the past or in the future, the Third Doctor is more than willing to get into physical confrontations. He'll get in a sword fight. He'll get lowered in a pit with a pole arm and duel to the death with some 6'8" behemoth, or he'll, karate chop some villain. It's really cool because, like I said, it sort of gives him that sort of James Bond kind of a feel. He's got the cars, he's got the chicks, he's got the gadgets, he's got the karate. Hiya! Chop! And then he's got the arch villain, and he's got sort of the military organization there that sort of does things behind the scenes. So it's pretty awesome. I really enjoy the Third Doctor overall. I know for a fact he's my favorite Doctor. And I would go as far to say that I think a lot of people like the Third Doctor, but most people wouldn't put him as his favorite. But I highly recommend the Third Doctor. If you're going to get into Doctor Who, definitely give the Third Doctor a shot. Speaking of giving things a shot, dun da da da, sounds like recommendation time. Because the Third Doctor had 5 seasons and, like I said, 24 stories and just over 130 episodes, there's much more to choose from. So ultimately, I'm going to have more recommendations than I did in the past. So I'm going to give you guys a grand total of 8 recommendations, although one of the recommendations is going to be kind of a, maybe sort of recommend, but we'll talk about that. The first story I'm going to recommend is Ambassadors of Death. This is from early on when he was paired with Liz Shaw. I like this episode because it kind of has sort of a mystery to it. It lets you use your imagination. It sort of has kind of a detective feel to it, like you don't really know. They got to figure stuff out. You don't really see the aliens that often. They're always behind the suit, so the show lets you kind of use your imagination a little bit. Overall, it's a really well done episode. Big fan. Next one I'm going to recommend is Terror of the Autons. This is great because it introduces Jo Grant. More importantly, it introduces the Master. First time we see the Master duke it out with the Doctor, and the Autons come back for a second time, sort of those plastic guys that pew-pew with laser guns in their hand. Third one I'm going to recommend is Colony in Space. And out of all the 8 recommendations I'm going to give, Colony in Space, if I had to choose just one, it would be the one I would choose. To me, Colony in Space represents everything that is the Third Doctor. There's fights, all kinds of crazy stuff going on. There's detective work. He's trying to figure out, why certain things are happening on this planet. There's this alien race. The Master's there. There's warring factions. Jo Grant's with them. The TARDIS is actually able to go somewhere else besides Earth. There's just all kinds of cool stuff going on in Colony in Space. I'm a huge fan. Definitely give this story a shot. Next story I'm going to recommend is The Mutants. This is definitely not everybody's favorite, and most avid Doctor Who fans would kind of scratch their head at this one. I like The Mutants just in general, and it's really hard to explain why I like it. He goes to this planet, there's these warring factions, and there's this whole race that's mutating, and nobody really knows why they're mutating, but nobody really cares, but the Doctor cares. Really good stuff. The next episode, The Three Doctors, this is the one I'm only going to kind of recommend. I'd recommend The Three Doctors because you get to see the third, the second, and the first Doctor on screen together, and for the first time they fight and meet Omega, the Time Lord who is responsible for the creation or mastering of the black hole or whatever. So it's okay. The reason I only kind of halfway recommend it is this is one of those horrible scripts that portrays the Brigadier as a bumbling idiot, despite the fact in several previous stories he was shown as a genuinely intelligent, capable military leader. So I'm going to kind of recommend The Three Doctors, sorta. Next one is Frontier in Space. There's all kinds of stuff going on with this one. A lot of kind of political intrigue, warring factions in space. The Master's there for the last time, unfortunately, because Roger died after this. And you also see the Daleks towards the end, allied with the Master. Great episode. Next one I'm going to recommend is Green Death. This is the last episode that Jo Grant appeared in. And not only does he kind of take on sort of an environment sort of stand, the Doctor's against pollution and all this stuff, but there's really a lot of emotion sort of between Jo Grant and the Doctor. Jo Grant falls in love with the scientist, and you can tell the Doctor isn't happy about it because the guy's taking away Jo Grant from him. There's a really powerful scene in the end, and it's really a good episode, although the special effects are pretty bad at a few points. But hey, if the special effects weren't bad, it wouldn't be Doctor Who. Last one I'm going to recommend is Planet of the Spiders. This is the final episode of the Third Doctor, where he regenerates into the Fourth Doctor, and I would just recommend it more so for that than anything else. The special effects aren't that great, but once again, they never really are. He fights these big, huge spiders on a different planet. Lots of crazy stuff goes on. So those are going to be my recommendations, and like I said, I really enjoy the Third Doctor. 5 seasons and 4.5 years. Easily my favorite. 2 thumbs up. Cold Turkey is a huge fan. Speaking of which, thanks for watching.